can't see. Is it recording?
I can't see if it's recording. Oh, yeah, it says
it has started. Great, and so is the meeting. Welcome everybody to the Open Talks, the Leicester Gallery Open Talks, the Visiting Artist series in photography and video and fine art as well. And hopefully we've got guests from everywhere, including fashion, hopefully. Today's talk is very, very special. We've got the artist Julia Hadji-Stylianou. Julia was one of my absolute star students that studied here at De Montfort, and she was someone that stood out because honestly I've never seen a student work so hard as you used to. I mean, I don't know if you still, I think you still work really, really hard. You're just she would come to the tutorials with a stack of sketchbooks, and it would be, you know, I would sort of say, she was actually the only student that I've said, don't work so hard. Usually I say to all the students, work hard, but for Julia I would say, do you have a social life? You've got to enjoy yourself. What is this? And she'd arrive with piles of sketchbooks. So, I mean, I've taught hundreds of students, so it's to actually remember students and is quite something for a lecturer, because we literally have hundreds, you know. So this was right from, I think I taught you first in the second year, photography and video, and you would arrive with these masses of sketchbooks and masses of work. So I'm not sure, we'll look at your work now, and I'm sure that that's a key to your success, that you've got this really dedicated work ethic. So Julia studied and she graduated in 2012, so that was 10 years ago. And then she went on to do the MA here at De Montfort University. And then she carried on as an artist, and then worked also with a commercial side of fashion photography with Shoe Zone and with Next. So there's so she's got a lot of sides to her. So I'm going to hand over to you, where we're going to explore identity, the mind and place with Julia.
Hello everyone, I'm just going to share my screen now. Just let me know, Lala, if you can see all that. Is that ready? Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, Hadji-Stylianou now.
So as Lala said, yeah, I studied at DMU. I'm just going to show you a little bit of my commercial work really quickly before we go into my sort of the themes that I'm going to talk about today. So I've done the odd bit of freelance work in the past. I've done a couple of commissions and weddings. And as Lala said, I do currently work as an image retoucher for Next PLC, and also as a sessional lecturer in fashion photography and video at De Montfort University. So just a little bit there. But a little bit of broader information about my photographic practice before I start going into depth with some of my series today. A lot of my work focuses on making connections between identity, this sense of self, and places and location. I'm half British, half Greek Cypriot, and I've spent a lot of my life traveling and residing between both England and Cyprus, which has allowed me to draw a lot of significance and importance into my photographic practice. This idea of sort of this constant shifting from one place to another, particularly where this sense of self and identity is concerned. You know, we can see identity as this big umbrella term that generally means the condition of being oneself, or how a person might define themselves. But so much makes up a person's identity, and I think that's what makes each and every one of us so incredibly unique. You know, there's a lot of subcategories to identity as well. We think about social identity, gender identity, that idea of a sense of self and self-image that I mentioned previously. And identity can be really influenced and shaped depending on things like our mental health, our culture and nationality, communities that we're a part of, our relationships and social interactions with other people, our memories, even down to the more mundane things, you know, like our everyday routine. And I've also explored how I think The land and location is also a big influence in connections between a person and their identity. And even then, you know, our identities shift and warp and change throughout time. So I think time also being a very important factor, really. You know, we're constantly changing. And I've often explored this through the form of portraiture and self-portraiture, sometimes more documentary style photography and landscape, which I'm going to be showing you today. So identity in the mind. The mind, really a general term for it, it's sort of made up of both the conscious and the unconscious. And the first series I'm going to show you a little bit about today is my Chasing Dreams series. I started this series originally with the intention of exploring the mind, but more specifically the unconscious, and the connections that this has with a person's identity. You know, it's been said that the consciousness can be influenced by our unconsciousness, and dreams in particular signal the presence of that unconscious process at work. And I started looking into dream theories. I'd always been really interested in them. I did a psychology A level, and even though I wasn't very good at it, I was always really fascinated by dreams. And both psychoanalysts Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung believe that dreaming can help us better understand the mysteries of how the mind and body interact. So these first few images here, I started exploring the more sort of symbolic meaning of dreams, and particularly looking at bodies of water and their physical reflections, or even like mirrors and reflections, as a metaphor to portray how dreams are considered a reflection of our conscious lives. You know, they're supposedly meant to reflect our thoughts and concerns that we have in our waking lives. But as the project progressed, I started to explore the more fragmented state of dreams. You know, dreams are often quite remembered in quite a broken manner. You may wake up and only remember snippets. And through this, I started to look into how our own identities within dreams can be slightly obscure as well. This idea that we can assume the form of a slightly or even completely different person in our dreams, be that physically, psychologically, or even both. And this fragmented idea is where I started to introduce my photography and use glitch art techniques. But first and foremost, I started with some long exposure portraits. I felt the long exposures really reflected this idea of our identity being quite obscure in dreams. And then I started to introduce those glitch editing techniques on top of it, so merging photography with glitch art. And it was a complete coincidence that I'd actually come across glitch art at the time through some music that I was listening to, and I'd seen some album artwork that had been done by a photographer called Rob Sheridan. And I thought it was really interesting how sort of he'd made these portraits look really distorted and things through the glitch art. And I thought it'd be an interesting technique to maybe try and apply to some of my own photography to communicate that idea of this obscure identity that we sometimes have in our dreams. So these initial glitches on the screen here are actually done by opening an image in TextEdit on my Mac. So it basically opens a JPEG as a chunk of code rather than a visual. And then I would basically disrupt that code by either adding or subtracting a lot of code and then resaving the image and then reopening it as a JPEG again. The process in itself, however, is really unstable, very unpredictable, which I felt was symbolic actually on some level, because it can, to a point, completely corrupt the file if you add and subtract too much code. To the point where the image won't open anymore. So I had to make sure I was working with duplicates of my actual imagery, hence using just sort of JPEGs and things, rather than the original raw file. But these are actually some of the more successful edits that I came out with, and completely unintentionally, I really like how I managed to somehow get the glitch going across each of their faces, again communicating this idea of an obscure sort of blurred identity, and sort of showing that how that would come through with dreams, and also the really vivid colors as well. sort of relating back to these dream theories, how dreams in themselves are sort of can be quite vivid and weird and wonderful. And then I moved on to the second type of glitch making, which was analog glitches. And these were basically, I had my images again hooked on a laptop, but hooked up to a little CRT monitor so they were connected with an HDMI to either VGA or AV converter wire. I'm not entirely sure. Can't fully remember all the techie aspects of it. Basically, my laptop was connected to a little CRT monitor, and I basically then just cut the wire that connected them. So the wire had been frayed, and then we started to sort of slowly bring the edges of each of the sort of severed wires together, so that the laptop attempted to communicate with the monitor, and we came out with these different glitches. So essentially, by disrupting these analog signals between the monitor and my laptop, this created these glitch effects on the screen, which I then photographed with my camera. So the long exposures are already meant to reflect this idea of identity in our dreams being obscure, blurry, but the glitch techniques added on top of that worked on a symbolic level in depicting dreams, and often our sense of self in dreams as unpredictable. You know you're going to go to sleep tonight, you're possibly going to dream, but you can't predict what your dream is going to be about. You can't predict if you'll even be yourself in your dream, unless of course you're familiar with like lucid dreaming, where you're in control of your dreams. You may or may not even remember the dream, again relating back to this fragmented state. And in the same way, I knew I was going to glitch these photographs, but I couldn't predict how they were going to look. So overall, it's this idea that there is no control, there is only this unpredictability. And I think this example here is an interesting way to portray it. This is the exact same image that is being glitched 4 different times. So each glitch unique, creating a different effect as a metaphor for this different dream identity, you could say. And this really led to the final piece of the series, which ended up being a 4x4 square matrix. But in this square matrix, there are only 4 photographs that I shot. There are 4 long exposure photographs of 4 different people. But the importance lies in the fact that each 4 images have then been glitched 4 different times, thus producing a completely different look to each image. So there are 4 different people and 16 different dream identities. And this series was featured in Art Reveal magazine back in 2019, where I did an interview for them. So moving on to a second series of mine that looks at identity and the mind. So I talked about the unconscious processes at work in my Chasing Dreams project. And in my non-compos mentis project, I focused more on the conscious mind. So, that's made up of all of our thoughts, feelings, memories, emotions, everything that we're aware of, basically. And it's the first year I took the plunge with self-portraiture. I was really inspired by Cindy Sherman and her concept of playing these various personas and characters in her disguised self-portraits. She looked at identity and social role-playing. And then I looked and came across Francesca Woodman, whose work delves into this concept of human fragility. And she created these really beautiful and yet haunting self-portraits as she explored this sort of notion of questioning her own identity. And at the same time, I wasn't in the best place mentally. I was struggling with my anxiety quite a lot, which led me to question my own sense of self and my own identity. I didn't sort of know what I was doing and things. And the only thing that really gave me joy during this time in my life was my artwork, was my photography. And I thought, well, how can I channel what I'm feeling into my work through self-portraiture, exploring how I could question my own sense of self through my photography. And I started taking these long exposure self-portraits, you know, to portray how my mental health affected me. You know, the long exposures are meant to communicate this sense of unpredictability and doubt, often feeling like my mind would spiral. And I was happy with how the images were looking, but I felt I wanted to add something more to it. And this is where I started to look at the importance of place and location with regards to identity in my imagery as well. I started shooting these long exposure portraits in these scouted, neglected areas of abandonment. So I sort of went about scouting out locations beforehand and found some abandoned places. And the purpose of this was, again, to communicate this idea of my mind, my world feeling run down alongside the long exposure. But I also wanted to communicate my idea through the importance of colour and colour palette in my imagery too. You know, each imagery is slightly desaturated in colour to convey this notion that mental health, you know, depression, anxiety can quite metaphorically suck the colour and vibrance out of someone's life. You know, it can be quite a mentally and physically draining thing. And I really did actually find it quite therapeutic. You know, Cindy Sherman herself says she loves to work alone. You know, she loves being her own model, stylist, photographer. And I actually really resonated with that in this project. I liked working alone. I liked not feeling any inhibitions, especially sort of doing a project that was quite personal to me. And something that I'd never really spoken about before doing the project. You know, the series itself was a huge turning point for me in expressing my anxiety visually. And it was an attempt, I guess you could say, at communicating with others and hopefully on some level reaching others and connecting with others that had experienced the same struggles. You know, this is a project that's now about 11 years old, I want to say, and it's good to see how mental health now is much less of a stigma than I felt it was back then. You know, we talk more openly about mental health now in the workplace, in education, etc. This image in particular was exhibited at the Royal Photographic Society Biennial exhibition in 2015 that toured the UK. It's probably one of my favourites out of the series because I'm quite specific with symmetry in imagery, and so you can see the background here, the backdrop is quite symmetrical, but I'm deliberately slightly off center. And I sort of wanted to get that point across of this anxiety that I was feeling, this just slight sort of uneasiness. And that's the sort of feeling I was trying to get across in the imagery. And this image here was shot on film as part of a group exhibition in Rome 2019 that focused on the concept of perceptions. So we're looking at the identity and the mind, and you can see in my non-compos mentis project that I started to incorporate place and location into the imagery and how it linked to identity. And this is where I really started to focus on location in particular. I think if we all look back on our childhood, past few years and things, when we think of a specific memory that is tied to a specific place, it holds a relevance and an importance. You know, there is an emotion usually tied to a location. And, sometimes it can be a conflict of emotions. It can be a negative or a positive association. But nonetheless, a place and a location can stir these memories and emotions for us. I think we can all relate to what is called the Proust Effect, which is that phenomenon of reliving events and memories through the sensory stimuli. So, if you smell someone's perfume, for example, or you eat something, you sort of you're taken back all of a sudden, you have this memory, and that's what the Proust Effect is. And I think this works equally with the importance of location as well. It's worth noting that the associations we have with these places depends on the individual as well. If we consider how the whole world, everywhere is completely seeped in history from one generation to the next, this specific location could have made memories for millions of people. So millions of people are part of this location's history, which is something I think links us, but also divides us based on that individual memory and association. So perhaps it's a place you used to go to on summer holidays when you were young, or maybe it's where you learnt to ride a bike or something. So I wanted to explore how location and place is connected to our memories and has a significant impact on our identity. And for this project, my personal identity specifically. So though I was born in the UK, we then moved to Cyprus when I was 10, where I spent my teenage years growing up, and then moved back to the UK when I came back to university. So, you know, this series really looks at these two very different places that I grew up in, though both places hold the same value as one another. I started looking at family sort of trees, family ancestry to begin with, and looking at all the old photographs of my family as well. And again, looking at this importance of place that featured within the photographs. And I started jotting down lots and lots of places that I remember being quite an important part of my life and part of who I am. And I started to travel back to these various places and shoot the landscape, really, and also the specific details within these landscapes. And I think originally I wanted it to be quite just a documentary piece, sort of all these places tied together through my identity. But as the project progressed and my ideas progressed, I started to intervene in some of the images. This image here in particular was shot at a hotel back in Cyprus, which I used to actually go to the swimming pool of, and this is the swimming pool. But since then, since going back to it, it had been abandoned. It had, you know, it was completely cordoned off and things. And I'd managed to get in, and I just caught a glimpse of my shadow in the debris, in the reflection of the water in the pool. And it sparked an idea. And, you know, this is where the idea of the absence and presence was born. So the absence in the images, which are the plain landscapes, portray a frozen moment in time of these places when I went back to visit them. Some places have changed a lot. Some locations have hardly changed at all, yet here they remain, as do my memories associated with them. The idea of presence, however, focuses more on that intervention that I mentioned. I started placing myself in the locations as well, but deliberately as quite a small character, as a small person. So I stood quite far away from the camera. And the whole point of me being quite a small figure was to represent the idea of me literally and metaphorically being only a tiny part of these places, a tiny part in terms of scale, but also in terms of history and associations and memories, etc. Only a tiny part of history within these surroundings. And then I started to combine the photos together, both the absence and the presence photos together as diptychs. And this is what led to the sort of final series of diptychs. You know, the links, however, between each absence and presence image was again primarily down to me, this personal identity, whether that was a linking memory, a linking emotion, a linking visual. And essentially sort of I deliberately combined photographs from very different places in my life. So some of the diptychs are photographs of both Cyprus and England. Some of the ones that are just England are two very sort of polar opposite places in the UK. So sort of a view of my world and my family history and you know, places that have had an impact on my identity. And these diptychs were actually featured in the online photography journal Black River that was released in late 2020. Something a little bit more newer, I guess now. When the COVID pandemic hit nearly 2 years ago now, as we're all aware of, I was furloughed back in April 2020, shortly after lockdown began. And it opened up a huge window of time, you know, time to create artwork again. having a full-time job can sometimes, you know, it's sort of, you're left with no time at all to do research and things. But yeah, having all this time just allowed me to sort of start looking into and researching other artists that were responding to the pandemic creatively. And I knew I wanted to create a body of work that I felt others could also relate to during this time of uncertainty. So I basically sought out to photograph the new norm and document what it personally meant for me to stay at home, stay safe. And I just began to look around the house, really, because that's the only place we could really go, and the neighborhood and things. And just finding small points of interest, you know, whether it's how the light came through the window and created all these really interesting shadows. And, you know, just going about my new everyday routine and just starting to notice these tiny little mundane things that actually I found quite interesting. And it also led me to explore my mental state and identity in these images as well, you know, documenting my days at home. But again, I was looking at the importance and exploring the importance of place in relation to identity at this time. You know, the home, you know, it's a place of security and comfort. It's a safe haven. We come home from a day of work and you unwind, you put your feet up, you leave your work day behind you. And yet all of a sudden, we were all confined to our houses. We were all stuck indoors, which you might think, you know, would create a lot of conflicting emotions for some people, and how feeling locked up may affect people's identity. And I chose to keep the project in black and white to emphasize this idea of time standing still, days merging together, you know, not time sort of losing meaning at this point. I think there's a timelessness about black and white photography. I think it shifts the audience to look at the content in the photo. And I wanted to portray this sense of timelessness in the images in relation to this huge amount of time I had all of a sudden, we all had all of a sudden. And I think there's sometimes something that can be quite distracting about colour photography, especially if there's something, you know, that sort of pulls your eye into it, while black and white sort of keeping everything monochrome. It's more about the, you know, the lighting, the beautiful contrasts and things. And by not wanting the audience to be distracted by the colour and really just focus on the content in the imagery, I felt it related to much how at the time, you know, to how at the time I wasn't distracted by much at all either. Because simply put, you know, we had this pandemic, but we couldn't do anything about it. We were all stuck at home. So we didn't really have much to do and much to be distracted by anyway. You know, roads were empty. You think bustling cities were complete ghost towns. Everything was at this standstill. So I wanted to interpret this standing still in time through the black and white, as well as the mundane everyday content in the images. And these images were also featured in the Royal Photographic Society contemporary blog, where members submitted their visual interpretations of the pandemic and the effects that they felt it had on society. So quite a short-lived project, but it was really interesting to shift looking at lots and lots of different locations to looking at the home and its effect on identity. This next one is still an ongoing project for me. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And it's, as with most of my work, as I said, I've always been interested in time, in memories, passing of time. And this series explores the passing of time and how our memories shift and change over time. This is actually the first Polaroid photograph I ever took. I bought my first Polaroid photograph camera about 11 years ago now, I want to say. And I had no idea how a Polaroid worked. I just got really excited. I pressed the button, took a photo of my sister here on the canal. I didn't know how to develop it. I didn't know you had to put it somewhere dark and warm for it to develop. Exposed it to light as soon as it came out the camera. I mean, it created some really odd effects, and the whole image turned orange. And I really quite like it, actually, looking back on it now. But when I bought my first Polaroid camera, I started capturing just really random, fleeting moments, just really mundane things. And you could say it's a really expensive way to be shooting really mundane things, because any of you who've got a Polaroid camera know how expensive the film is. But I don't know, there was something, I guess you could say, quite niche to them, because they were Polaroids. I just loved, I loved photographing just random items. This project really is solely made up of more still life things than people, rather than people. But I loved capturing these random moments. To most of us, they're really mundane things, but I often find there's a beauty to be found in really normal, everyday things. It's lovely to look back on these images that instantly spark up a memory that had been, has been hidden away for so long. There's, images here that I would have, that hold it and having a memory association with them that I would have probably completely forgotten had I not taken the photograph. And I think that's why, people love to look through old family albums as well. There's a nostalgia, there's a sentimentality there. And, again, it sparks up those memories. And I feel my concept on time and changing memories works symbolically with the unpredictable Polaroid photograph. Polaroids usually fade with time as they're gradually exposed to more and more light. They produce these tiny little imperfections. You can see like light leak and things, which actually when I first shot them wasn't there. It sort of developed over time. And I thought that, in the same way, this can happen to our memories as we grow older as well. We may remember things slightly differently from what actually happened, or we begin to forget these tiny little details that may have actually had a significant impact on our lives and still shape who we are today, and are basically part of that ongoing evolving identity that I talked about at the beginning. We take this snapshot, we capture this frozen moment in time of this memory, but both Polaroid and memory alike start to shift and change as time goes on. So I think this is why it's a constant ongoing project of memories, really. And the final series I'm going to be talking about today is my most recent one. So it's still in its infancy stage. I only started this at the end of 2020. But I basically developed a huge interest in plants and nature during the pandemic. I took up gardening, and I found myself developing this huge appreciation for the flora of our world, and also trees too, and their importance in our world. Trees are often termed the lungs of the earth. They turn carbon dioxide into breathable oxygen for us, and in turn we turn oxygen into carbon dioxide for them, and there's a connection there. But trees also serve as historic and heritage landmarks as well. To many people, trees connect us to where we live. They create a sense of place. If we look at Sherwood Forest, for example, in Nottinghamshire, it's home to hundreds and hundreds of trees, but the brilliant major oak is the one that stands out. It's thought to be nearly 1,000 years old. And it's also known throughout the world as the secret hideout of Nottinghamshire's famous outlaw folk hero, Robin Hood. It's this association again, this connection, like I described in my Absence and Presence project. Sherwood Forest, one of many forests that are completely seeped in English folklore. And there's a cultural identity and an importance about that. So I was thinking, about linking trees to trees and the importance of location, of place and trees to human identity, how trees constitute a sense of place and identity themselves. We can also look at the tree as a metaphor. We talk about our family tree, our roots and where we're from. And I feel in turn, humans are connected to trees. We are connected to the land, both physically and spiritually. And this idea of identity and trees and place and time, it all got me looking into ancient trees in particular. And I was truly fascinated to see how many there are just in the UK alone. Woodland Trust have a map an ancient tree map on their website with all the different coordinates where you can actually go and see these ancient trees. You know, a lot of them across the UK range anywhere from 400 to 1,000 years old, most of them still alive. And these are actually some of the photographs I took on my very first venture out for the project in Bradgate Park, just outside Leicester. And really, they were shot on 35mm film. But sort of looking back at them, you know, the photographs don't do them justice. They look quite small in the photographs, but actually standing in front of these trees physically, they completely dwarfed me. You know, they were absolutely massive. I was truly fascinated, but, you know, they looked at these beautiful architectural sculptures. You know, I found myself almost personifying each one, you know, each one also looking so strikingly unique with its own identity to it, you know, beautiful weathered bark and things. And around this time, I was doing some research on the side and researching alternative printing processes and came across the cyanotype, which was quite commonly used in Victorian England. For those of you that don't know, you combine two chemicals that you apply to paper, you leave it to dry, and then you can add your digital negatives or your film negatives onto the paper, and you either expose them to UV light or sunlight. You then wash the paper and you are left with what is known as the cyanotype, which is this, you know, they're known for this Prussian blue, this blue color to them. And I thought, what an interesting, you know, because I was looking at this sort of idea of time and age, and the cyanotype being quite prominent in Victorian England, I thought I wanted to sort of approach the prints of these trees with a sense of age themselves. So not just doing digital prints. So I started to approach them in this way. And I felt originally that the Prussian blue colour, you know, associated with cyanotypes, it evoked this sense of calm. You know, blue in itself as a colour connotation, that there is a calmness, there's a calmness to it. But slowly I started move towards T-toning those cyanotypes. And T-toning is basically the process of washing your cyanotype in a bath of like soda crystals, and then dunking it in a tub of tea for anywhere up to 12 minutes. And I felt this new earthy palette about the images resembled nature much more closely. You know, the neutral hues created a much more harmonious image. But I think I, again, also approached the prints in this way more specifically, because I think they evoke a sense of time and age far more than just the normal cyanotypes. And when you think about it, many, if not all of these ancient trees that I'm photographing are far older than photography itself. You know, the first photograph ever created, you think it was taken in 1826 or 1827, I believe. And we think of like the major oak that's nearly 1,000 years old. You know, photography is a very new medium in comparison to the age of some of these trees. But above all, as I mentioned earlier, I found each of these trees very unique. And the beauty of the alternative printing process, I guess quite similarly to producing those glitches in my Chasing Dreams series, is that each print in itself is unique. You know, producing the cyanotype of these trees and the T-toning of these trees works on a symbolic level in communicating this individuality of each tree, this individual identity of each tree, this personification of the trees that I mentioned. You know, it depends on the type of paper that you use, the length of the exposure time down to the millisecond, even down to the type of tea that you use when you tone the cyanotypes. So as I mentioned, the project still is in its infancy stage, and I'm interested to see where I'll go with it. So I'm still at the minute sort of taking these photographs and making these cyanotypes on a more portrait basis, because as I mentioned, I was personifying these trees, and I quite like them in the portrait format. But I like the idea of potentially looking at incorporating portraiture into it as a next step, you know, combining human identity with the environment. But I'm also really fascinated by English folklore and mythology and this cultural identity, like the Major Oak and Robin Hood. And there, you know, there's several forests across the UK with these ancient trees that are hugely associated with English folklore. So the project is still evolving, cogs are still turning, and I'm excited to see where I go with it. But that's really all I've got time to show you today. But before the Q&A begins, I just wanted to conclude with this quote by Ralph Hattersley, who was a photographer, commentator and educator. You know, and he believed that photography was a way of processing life, of processing its meaning to an individual. And I felt this quote resonates quite closely with how I feel about my artwork and its subject matter. You know, I like to make work out of my personal experiences. Not only is it something that's easily accessible, but it's part of who I am. And I guess you'd like to think you know yourself more than anyone else. And I've always used photography as a means to exploring subjects and things that I'm really interested in. And I suppose you could say that to try and understand what our lives mean to us helps to shape our identity, helps to shape who we are. And I like to think that it's something a lot of people can relate to on a personal level as well. And that's it from me.
Oh, people, turn on your cameras. Give Julia a fantastic clap. That was really, really good. I mean, really, honestly, totally amazing. You see what I mean? This is just Julia. This is 1 hour of Julia. She's just full. Every single image, I'm not kidding. They are just so, you know, I could go on forever with how inspiring each image is. You know, you've just got a real talent there. But is there any questions? I mean, do put your hand up, turn your camera on, and ask Julia any question you like. I mean, I wonder if I can ask, you know, some of you guys studying art here to ask any question you like that you've maybe thought of. Has anybody got a question? This is the moment when they're all shy. Or do you want me to just take over with all my questions? Have we got a question, Lucy?
Hello.
Hi, Lucy. Hi.
Hi, Lala. How are you doing?
Yes.
Hi, Lucy.
Absolutely loved that.
Oh, thank you, Lucy.
All those kind of things that you have been exploring in your work, they're all just like, they're real big questions, I think, that I think about it a lot, maybe more than I should. You know, things like consciousness and what it means to be conscious, and dreams as well. I thought those glitched portraits were amazing. Yeah. And I really liked, there's like a parallel between how I guess when you're dreaming, when your brain's asleep, how it's inventing all these random crazy things, but then your waking brain was creating these crazy things.
Yeah.
At the same time, like by intervening with cutting wires and all that kind of thing. So I love those. Do you think that's something that you might explore further at some point?
Yeah, like you said, I like sort of exploring these really big things. They're almost like on a philosophical level, and I think this is why it's so interesting, because so many people have got their own interpretations on it and their own opinions on it, and it's really great to see that, you know, show in different people's artwork and things. So yeah, it's definitely something I want to go back to, sort of exploring more of the unconscious and things. And like you said, it's something we all share. You know, we all dream, so we can all on a level relate to it. I think that's why I like to make work that's, you know, even though it's personal to me, is relatable on some level to others as well. Yeah,
definitely. It's an area that's like, science is obviously trying to unpack it all because it involves the brain, but there's something that there's almost the scientific can't quite get a grasp on with it.
Can't comprehend. Yeah.
I
like that sort of, you know, despite all the science and everything, there's stuff that we still don't know about it. We still don't fully know why we dream. And it's just, you know, really interesting to go down that sort of psychological route, but then sort of apply it in the artwork as well and explore it that way.
And I was thinking as well, your recent one with the trees, I don't know how like possible it would be, might not be very practical, but I'm sure I've seen, it might have been more like etchings or drawings, but I don't know if it's worth looking into possibly printing photos onto things like tree bark or leaves.
Yeah, so I've actually looked at, it's actually something, again, I'm looking into. They're called chlorophylls, I believe, which is where you can sort of create photographs on like leaves and things, but again, you need to expose them to sunlight, and you basically put the negative, and it's, again, it's all science, it's all like photosynthesis and whatever it is with leaves and stuff, but it's combining science with art. So that is another route I'm potentially looking at going down. It's just there's no leaves on the trees at the minute.
Have to wait till next autumn.
But I've actually read, you know, it's quite a long process with like chlorophylls in particular, but you have to leave them out for several days at a time sometimes for it to properly work. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm looking into. And I think there's also something called, instead of using tea, you can use other things like pigments and things like beetroot and things. So using things from nature to create, not a cyanotype, I've forgotten the name for it now. I don't think it's ambrotype. But yeah, using, again, natural things that have got sort of their own pigment to create imagery as well.
Yeah,
it's considered more of an environmentally friendly way to do stuff as well, rather than using printer ink, you know, especially at a time where we sort of face this climate crisis and we're trying to be, you know, sort of as environmentally friendly as possible. I think it's interesting to try and incorporate that somehow into the project.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Thank you. And any other questions, just do come in and ask any other questions. We've got a comment. Will Gibbons says, really interesting, thank you. I love the series of you visiting places of significance to you, with you stood in the frame. Really nostalgic feel to all of your work. And that's very true. There is a nostalgic feel, you know, like you've already, it could be my family photo, or you lived it already. I was thinking you could put, I was thinking of the oak tree and thinking I just need to see your little figure. So you definitely will be expanding on that with the photo.
Yeah, and I think this is where I maybe want to start involving other people in it as well. You know, there's obviously places across the country that, you know, have got these significant sort of locations that are important to specific people. So I'd love to, and I've never been one for really going up to people going, hey, can I take your photograph, please? I've always been quite timid in that sense. But, you know, associating people and place together, I'd love to maybe try and incorporate that sort of photographs of these people by these giant trees, if they've got any family history and things within that area. So that's another potential avenue. I might take that down.
I was wondering, I wonder if we could ask some of the people in the talk. I mean, if Amber, have you got your? Are you listening, Amber? Do you want to, Amber? Where do you want? Because you're actually a third year on photography, aren't you? And video. If you're around, or you're typing, I was wondering what you feel about the talk, because that's right. So do you? Have you got any questions or anything? Because this is you 10 years ago, Julia, you doing 3409 and all those modules that you were doing. Have you got any questions or anything? What did you can ask any silly questions even, you know, because this is your moment. Because I guess it is quite hard, you know. Sorry to put you on the spot. It's just that it's so great to have some of you photography and video people, some fine art people as well. Sundeep, have you got a question? You know, because it's, you know, it's really fascinating how you've from nothing. You go with nothing, just a camera, and you get so much. They're so rich. Will is saying, I did a project last year that focused on place and memory. I'm also third year photography. Great, Will. So your talk was really useful. Yeah, it is really
I think with what you said, Lala, like you start with nothing. I often find when I've not got many ideas, I mean, I've actually got a little Word document. I'll get random ideas. I'll be shopping in the supermarket and I go, I've got an idea. I just put it down on my phone and then put it in this little Word document for later.
Yeah.
But it, you know, I often, I sometimes find myself a little bit with artist block and things, but this is where I start to read and research and just see what other people are doing as well. This is why I think it's really vital to go to talks, go to exhibitions, read and research things. I'm like subscribed to British Journal of Photography, you know, and it's just full of artists that you probably wouldn't come across online. So it's not really all about online being at your fingertips, you know, it's all here as well. I've also got, if you're ever struggling for ideas, I often look at this. It's called the Photographer's Playbook. And it's basically
Will
and it's basically
write that down.
It's got 307 assignments and ideas by various contemporary photographers. So if you ever feel stuck, for I don't know what to do, stuck for inspiration, there's loads of it. Like one here is, I'm just going to pull it to, I don't know, can't find one that one is where are we? So there's Stephen Shaw here, and one is called Intentionality. And it's, what does intentionality mean to you? It was working with intentionality that led to growth. I thought I had some kind of special insight when I was teaching and gave uniquely apt assignments. And then I realized what led to growth was not the nature of the assignment, but the fact that the more rigorously they followed the assignment, the more they approached photography. One is...
that would be you, rigorously.
Giving the mundane its beautiful due. Again, so some of the stuff I've been looking at, like looking at the beauty in the mundane, there's some really interesting things you can find in just the normal everyday life. So I definitely would suggest like reading.
You've got a bit of Julia magic, because those random moments that you did, the random items, you somehow, I mean, I could take random items and they would look like random items, but I don't know what you do, but you put some magic in them, and you it's not, although you say it's about, so they say, understanding your mental health, or you kind of sound as if it might be therapy or something.
Yeah, I do.
For me, I just look at them and see magic, and I see all maybe the deep and the struggles, but I also see all sorts of things, and that's what makes it so interesting. It's funny hearing you speak. You think maybe you're like, it could be a therapy thing. You're trying to understand yourself, or you're trying to make yourself feel better. Those kind of pictures are usually like chocolate. Well, you make yourself feel better. You might take a picture of a kitten, and then that makes you feel better. A picture of a kitten, but you don't do that. You really, I don't know. You've got a real power in image making. But anyway, I don't want to hog here we are. I just want to just read out a few more comments. Amber, who's on our third year course at photography videos, said, I thought it was really interesting. I haven't got any questions, but I do love all the different series that you've done. I felt they were all really well developed as they grew, which is true, really, and down to your, rigor, as that you say. And Will said, I'm writing that down as we speak. Haha. So he's wrote down the book.
The book.
Yes. And Sandeep says, I love your work. It's super interesting, inspiring. My favourite was the Dream series, as I dream a lot. Did you ever sell any of these works? Yes, because I want to buy one. She's going to sell one now, this minute. But go on.
Yeah, I've not actually sold any of the Dream series, but yeah. Yes.
You have now.
Well, actually, when I originally printed that 4x4 square matrix, the intention, I've still got it somewhere. It's a huge piece of artwork that was actually printed onto acetate, because if I was to exhibit it, I wanted to show it on a light box like the CRT monitor, essentially, because actually when I printed some of the images out just onto paper, they didn't have that same feeling as when, you know, you see light through it. And this is the thing with prints, look very different to images on screens because they're backlit on a screen, while on a print, you know, they can sometimes look quite dull, sometimes they look better, sometimes they look worse. I think it really just depends on the nature of the work and how the work looks, really. But yeah, I've still got it next door in a tube.
There's something else about you, and that is your modesty. You are a great artist who is very modest, and you know, you could definitely it's a lot of artists that you see nowadays, and like Damien Hirst, he's 99% ambition and 1% talent. I mean, you know, I mean, he's talented as well, but he's really ambitious. And so when he came out of art college, he was saying, I'm going to the Tate Modern, and he's banging down the door of the Tate Modern. He hasn't even got his idea yet. He didn't, but that came. So it's, and sometimes it's that combination, but don't worry, because it's going to happen for you. But it's just like you're going to be a world famous.
I think it, you know, like I've had the odd exhibition here and there, but you know, for third years listening as well, it is all about persistence. I've been turned down, I can't even remember how many times I've been turned down, you know. So it really is, when you finish university and things, it's about getting out there, you know, making your website, getting your work out there, but applying for everything, applying, you know. I've applied for so many exhibitions, so many competitions, and I've had the odd few and things.
Oh, you have.
I've actually had more failures than successes, but I think that's part of it, really. You know, it's part of the process, and it's to just not get too disheartened by it when it happens. And it will be disheartening, it always is. It's sometimes soul crushing, but it's just to pick yourself up and keep going and keep applying, keep making work that you're interested in. I think that, you know, and I tell my students now as well, make work that you're interested in, because if you're not interested in it, you're going to half-arse it, really, at the end of the day. You know, you are, you know, and it's stuff that you're really passionate about is the stuff that you're going to really put the effort into researching and creating. So I always tell my students, or, you know, if we give you this vague sort of term and this project to look into, pick a theme, but pick something that you're really interested in, because that's going to give you the motivation to really work hard at it and enjoy doing it at the same time. It's not just about working hard, it's about enjoying that process and the progress that you see throughout the series.
So so through all your difficult mental health issues and things, you enjoy then picking yourself up?
Yeah, I do. You know, I think a lot of, you know, I quite like that my work is slightly abstract. You know, there's what you see isn't always, I guess, that there's a slightly bit of a deeper meaning. Because I think I've always loved analysing artwork and picking things apart. And I love to appreciate the beauty of a photograph or a piece of art for what it is. But I think there's something to be said about taking it apart and listen to an artist really talk about their work and this sort of hidden or deeper meaning, you know, looking into how an artist ticks. And looking at the sort of underlying themes. I think that's what I've always really enjoyed doing, and trying to do that in my own work as well.
Yes.
But yeah, all in all, you know, you know, I've always loved making artwork. It's always been quite therapeutic to me. And yeah,
I don't get that from looking at it. It's just that I'm trying to, with your own comments, sort of take it back to you.
Yeah.
Because it's much deeper and full of, you know, I love that dream one, when it's half in focus but the whole face is out of focus, and I can't just spoil, I don't know which one to choose, but I'm going to be choosing one. So anyway, run out of time now, unless you've got last minute questions. But just thank you very much to you, Julia. It's a real honour to share this. It's a big thing sharing your work. So we're really, really honoured, and we've got this recorded, and it will go down forever. This talk, because it will be something to really watch and enjoy. I'm going to watch it again. It's just really brilliant. So thank you so much. We'll see everybody out, and I'll just say bye again. So
yeah, thank you everyone as well for taking the time.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah.
We're going to have a pause in artist talks, and then I'll email you all with the new artist talks. But we will be having Richard Wentworth, famous sculptor, if you've heard about him. He'll be coming in and giving an artist talk in a few weeks' time. So I'll email everybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. You can stop recording now. I ought to just quickly say thanks to the gallery for putting forward the